And we're live, so I'll welcome everybody to the special meeting of council for Tuesday, February the 3rd, which anybody in attendance will know is the budget approval meeting. Call the meeting to order and look to the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
There are none from administration. Yeah.
Great. I'll move the agenda be approved as presented then. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll jump right into H1, the new business 2021 budget. And I believe Ms. Rogers is leading us off on this discussion.
I am, thank you. And I'll just get Ms. Richardson to share her screen. Perfect, thank you. So as you've indicated, Mayor Borman, we are meeting today to approve the budget for 2021. So we do have a number of motions for council's consideration to approve the 2021 operating budget and business plan, the 21 to 23 operating planning summary, which is approved for planning purposes, the 2021 capital plan, and then finally the 21 to 25 capital planning summary, again for planning purposes. So I'll just run through quickly the agenda for today's meeting. I'll give a very quick reminder of the Finance Committee decision-making process and how we've gotten to this point today, how we've aligned the budget that's being presented to Council's goals and priorities. And then I'll turn it over to Ms. Richardson, who will give an overview of the operating budget and the capital budget. So just to start with, as a reminder, Council established a Finance Committee to assist in fulfilling your financial oversight responsibilities. And really the purpose of that is to have, to allow you to demonstrate fiscal responsibility in a transparent and public manner. We think you clearly did that, having spent just around 15 hours in meetings, reviewing the operating and capital plans. We reviewed the franchise fee allocation proposal, had discussion about the COVID contingency. You can see the list here. Asset management was reviewed. We spent a good bit of time talking about capital projects and also the funding for that. And spent a bit more time specifically talking about the fire hall, which is one of our biggest projects coming up in the near term. Then we reviewed debt and reserve balances and also talked quickly about affiliate and partner requests. In addition to the 15 hours we spent in meetings, Council spent a significant amount of time preparing for those meetings, reviewing the budgets, and then bringing forward amendments. And we did actually have a series of amendments and changes that were made throughout this budget or Finance Committee process. So just again, next slide, Chelsea, thanks. So the budget that was presented to Council and subsequently amended is aligned with Council's priorities as identified in the strategic plan. And you'll remember that in October, you had a revisit of your priorities given the impacts of COVID, and some minor adjustments were made. And that priority, that updated priority really provided direction to administration on how to prepare the budget to ensure that your priorities were incorporated and that we would be able to achieve those. Now, what else am I missing? Chelsea, next slide.
That me?
There we go. And now it's over to Chelsea to get into the detail. Yeah.
Yeah, so next I'm going to walk through some of what we've covered so far through the Finance Committee meetings and where we're currently sitting with regards to the operating and capital budget. I can appreciate this is probably extremely small for some of you, depending on the machine you're watching this on, but this is a slide that I think we've shown a number of times now, just updated for where we finally landed. So I'm just going to run through this quite quickly. So these are the identified budget pressures, as well as some of the offsets and mitigation measures that have been proposed. So first, I'll just quickly go through the changes to the revenue sources. We're anticipating $400,000 in taxes from new growth, which decreases the tax pressure. And just as a reminder, these are all the changes from the 2020 budget to the 2021 budget. So these aren't the total value, but just the change year over year. Next, one of the most significant new budget pressures is the revenue decreases, primarily in recreation sales and rentals due to COVID closures and the ongoing anticipated impacts to revenues. So that's 1.33 million. To mitigate this, a transfer from the tax stabilization reserve is planned to cover the net recreation deficit. There are some offsetting savings. So that's that $1 million there. There's an additional draw of 600,000 planned to fund the COVID contingency. A further additional transfer of 480,000 from the tax stabilization reserve is planned to reduce taxes. All other transfers from reserves were reduced by 137,000, and all other changes in revenues resulted in increases of 788,000. In addition, the next section there are a number of increases that are outside of our control from items such as the RCMP contract. Additionally, insurance costs have similarly increased by 55,000 there. Affiliate costs have gone down by 38,000. The cost of contracted services related to snow and ice control have increased by $60,000. And finally, we have 600,000 planned as a COVID contingency to cover incremental operating costs. We have debt servicing costs related to the Cougar Creek construction, and this is net of some matured loans. So that results in an increased budget pressure of 131,000. All other department changes, so we have reductions. There were specific savings sought in a number of areas such as travel, training, conferences. So total reductions across departments totaled 1.39 million, but some departments also had increases totaling 1.041 million. Human resource costs include 211,000 in cost of living adjustments, 10,000, that's the additional municipal contributions to FCSS and FRN. And then finally, all other payroll cost changes total $30,000. And not shown here because their amount has remained unchanged from 2020, but included in the budget is also the slippage number within our human resource costs. So the budget includes the full cost of employees being in their role for the full year. And then through slippage, we take into account the fact that some employees may leave the town or retire, and payroll is saved while those positions are vacant. So again, just as a reminder, that is a significant number that's included in the budget. But again, since our assumption for 2021 is the same as 2020, it doesn't show up here as a change. Finally, reserve fund contributions have increased, as has the transfer to capital. So all of these items result in the 6.5% net new tax requirement in 2021. So as just discussed, we are planning a number of draws from the tax stabilization reserve in order to mitigate or help to offset some of these impacts. And so this, we just wanted to show again briefly the model that we'd shown of the tax stabilization reserve, as that's how we're approaching some of these items. So some key assumptions in this modeling we've done. So we didn't have any contributions included for the time frame of 2021 to 2027, which could change. Those do only come from kind of one-time transfers or unbudgeted sources of revenue. So the model's conservative in that approach. And in addition to the pressures that we just went through, the next, the significant pressures that are coming in future years is we're anticipating and assuming that the census will go forward as planned this year, and that will result in showing a population for Canmore that will result in our cost share for the RCMP increasing up to 90%. And we're anticipating that will start in 2022. Future years of the multi-year plan that we've received from the RCMP also do include further staffing increases. We're also looking at a plan for a potential 6-year peak staffing phase-in the fire rescue area. And so what we've shown is we're planning for potential budget growth of 5% in each year before these additional impacts. And that's just for modeling purposes outside the 3 years that we have for the current operating plan. And we've also similarly continued 400,000 in taxes, continuing from growth each year. And so really what we're trying to do is we want to smooth some of the impacts of these additional pressures we're experiencing, while also leaving some flexibility. COVID continues to be a bit of a wild card, and so additional draws in 2021 may be required. At this point, our recreation facilities are still primarily closed. We're still not sure when they might be able to reopen. And so even from what we've brought forward in the plan, things have continued to change. So this is the tax stabilization reserve model that we'd shown previously with those key assumptions. And so just to show how we use this reserve as a reminder, this is where we were sitting before the final draw was proposed at, I believe it was the last finance committee meeting we had, to reduce taxes. So we were sitting at this 8.5%, but by taking the draw, and this is the 480,000 plus the 19 that was for paid parking, which is why it's not that exact amount, but we can see that's how we got down to the 6.5%, and how we can kind of use these draws over time to help smooth out the impact until we get to finally 2027, where we'll be fully absorbing the impact of both RCMP, fire rescue, and some of these other pressures into our operating budget. So to talk a little bit more about those future years, so this table summarizes the 3 years of the operating plan. So the total budget is 57.8, 60.9, and 63.9 million in 21, 22, and 23 respectively. Our non-tax revenue is slightly higher than our tax revenue, and that's fees, fines, utility sales, all those types of things. Additionally, we are predicting that growth to continue at approximately 400,000 in taxation each of the 3 years of the plan. So the revenue from taxes net of that growth is 26.5, 28.8, and 30.6 million. And the increase in taxes net of that growth are 6.5%, 6.9%, and 5%. So this table just shows the tax impact of this increase, both for every 100,000 of assessment for a sample household at 700 with an assessed value of $700,000. Our median assessment for 2020 was, I believe, 743,000. So this is just rounded down to the nearest 100,000. And then also a sample household at $1 million. So we can see that the total increase per 100,000 of assessment, again, property taxes change by a number of other factors. How your assessment has changed in comparison to the rest of the community also has a significant impact. As we've talked about, there are a lot of factors that go into what you'll actually see on your final tax bill. But if we look at the increase in our budget alone, independent of all those other factors, for every 100,000 of assessment, the increase, again, just related to this budget increase, would be $14 a year. So if you have a sample household at that 700,000 assessment and taking out any potential changes in that assessed value, you would be looking at an increase of $100. And similarly for the sample household of $1 million, that would be the total increase over the year. So that was it for the operating side. On the capital side, considerations that were discussed as part of the capital budget included policies and strategic alignment, in addition to the available funding envelope, grant availability, and asset management for the assets we need to maintain. And we believe we have the funding envelope and capacity to deliver on the projects that were put forward. As a reminder, our capital budget identifies any assets to be acquired and the required funding to do that. Basically, it forms our action plan for the upcoming period of what's needed and how that's going to be funded, whether through grants, operating capital, our capital reserves, or debt financing. So the 2021 capital budget for approval sets out in detail the year's proposed capital expenditures, and then the capital planning summary includes our planned major capital expenditures and funding requirements. And that's for adoption. As a reminder, it's not just physical, tangible capital assets we include in our capital budget, things like buildings, vehicles, but we also include studies and plans and things of that nature that have a multi-year benefit. This is the summary of the capital expenditures for the 5-year planning period 2021 to 25, and it shows the level of capital expenditure by year. As a reminder, 2022 is the biggest year of expenditures, and that's because it includes the 14.15 million, can't read my own writing, for the new fire hall construction. And then there's also $9 million for the Pump House 2 treatment capacity upgrade construction. And this is how the reserve levels will be impacted by delivering this capital plan. Those are reserve balances starting from 2019 through 2025 in each of the reserve areas. And then also our debt balances. So our debt levels increase annually as our revenue increases annually. The red line is the MGA allowable level of debt. Again, we've shown these tables a number of times, so I'm going to go through this quite quickly. As we've seen before, the black line is the allowable level of debt per council's debt policy. So through this horizon, we stay below the self-imposed debt limit and well below the MGA allowable level. This is then the debt servicing side. So same as the previous slide, the red line is for the MGA limit and the black line is for the town limit. We come closest in 2023 due to the debt taken for the fire hall and several large utility projects as well. So we won't go through all the projects that were discussed at the finance committee meetings and all of the projects that make up the capital budget. But the major projects I wanted to highlight include the South Bow River Loop feeder main, phase 2 of that project for a total of 3.3 million in the water utility area, the Stoneworks Creek phase 2 for 2.8 million. And that's one of the major engineering flood projects. As we discussed, the new fire hall. So the construction is in 2022, but the enabling works are in 2021 for a total of 1.35 million. And finally, we have the 2021 street and drainage rehabilitation work that engineering is doing for a total of $650,000. So finally, there are a couple of corrections that we just wanted to draw your attention to as we've been updating the final budget. We did discover a couple of small adjustments that need to be made, and these relate to some of the revisions that were made through the finance committee meetings. The estimate for the bylaw vehicle that we pulled together very quickly, I think it was essentially overnight, was a bit low. Our original estimate was $65,000, but in doing more work with our fleet team, we do need to increase the capital budget for that vehicle to $80,000. The citizen satisfaction survey was costed at $26,000, not the $19,000 that we had reported. The $19,000 was the net change in contracted services and communications, but there were some other items in there. So the cost of the actual citizen satisfaction survey, that's a bit of a tongue twister, was $26,000. So our apologies for any confusion around those two items. So that concludes everything that had been brought forward up till this point that would lead to the decisions for council that are available at this point. So again, looking to approve the 2021 operating budget and business plan, approve the 2022 to 2023 operating planning summary for planning purposes, the 2021 capital plan, and the 2021 to 2025 capital planning summary for planning purposes as presented. So at this time, if there are any further items for discussion of anything we've covered or questions, I'm happy to delve into anything further at this point.
Great, thanks very much, Ms. Richardson. That was a really concise overview of the work we've been doing for the last several months. I do have a question in regards to the annual surplus. So during at the finance committee meetings, there was some discussion about what the 2020 operating surplus might be and how that might be used or considered in regards to setting taxation levels for 2021. I recall that during the finance committee meetings, there wasn't enough certainty at the finance department on what we might see in that regard. So could you just give us an overview or a review of what finance department now knows about the surplus that would be expected?
So we have done some analysis on this. So as you said, this did come up a month ago, but in January, we're still quite close to the end of our last fiscal year. But in addition to working on the budget for the last month, a lot of work has also been happening behind the scenes in the finance team to try to get a sense and work through the year-end process for 2020. So we are in a position now where we think we're close enough. It's not still final. We do still have work that's ongoing that our finance team is doing. We'll also be working with our auditors throughout the month of March. Sometime entries can be uncovered through the audit and there will be further adjustments. So this is by no means final, but we are quite confident that we will land somewhere in the nature of 1.3 million is our final surplus related for 2020. So again, could still fluctuate slightly, but based on our analysis done till this point, that's where we're expecting to land, is somewhere in there. Looking at where that's coming from, it is somewhat similar to the surpluses that the town has run historically. Again, we can't budget for a deficit. So we're always, I wouldn't say we have a padded budget, but we are usually conservative to make sure we have enough for the work that needs to happen in each year. And particularly with COVID this year, there were a number of challenges that every area was dealing with work that was planned to get done that didn't get done. And so, you know, on our overall budget of, you know, for a surplus of 1.3 million, given the year that we had, you know, that's where we're projecting to land. And we do have a little bit of some options here that we can look at due to this later timing. If we were doing our budget approval on our normal timelines in December, we're too early to have this type of information. But because of this later timing this year, we can consider this surplus in the decisions that are before council now. So again, just as we were looking at this 1.3 million surplus and anticipating that this might come up, we did look at the potential impact of if we were to use, and again, we want to leave a bit of a buffer since this isn't quite final, but we did analyze what the impact of $1 million reduction would be. So what we were envisioning or exploring the opportunity to do was knowing that in April we'll be before council with the final surplus number. And at that point, we usually allocate the surplus out. And historically, what we've done that or used that surplus to do is to bolster our reserves, and it's allocated out to different reserve balances. So an option would be to reduce the reserve contributions in the 2021 budget to reduce the tax requirement. And then ultimately, again, at council's discretion, that then surplus could be used to kind of replace those reserve contributions that were taken out of the budget. So the reserve balances would still end where we had planned them to end up through the budget process. It would just come from the surplus rather than taxation. So if we were to take that approach and look at reducing our reserve contributions by $1 million, that would decrease our 2021 tax increase from the current 6.5%, as we'd referenced throughout the previous portion of today's presentation. It would bring it down to 2.5%. But as we always talk about, there's this kind of kicking the can effect that we always have. So by already decreasing 2021 to the 6.5%, that increased 2022. Previously, we're at 5%. It's now at 6.9%. And if we further reduce 2021 through reducing reserve contributions, again, the way we have the budget set up right now is those reserve contributions would be planned for 2022 and would need to come back into the tax supported budget. So at that point, our 2022 tax increase would go to 11.1%. That would be the impact of that. This is the summary of the 2021 transfers to reserve. So in the budget package that was included in the agenda package, you'll see we had a total of 4.4 million in transfers to reserve, that could be where we would look to make these reductions. Again, knowing that we will have some surplus to look at, and we could potentially allocate that to reserves to replace some of these reductions we might look at now. A lot of these we wouldn't likely want to make changes to at this point because there's offsetting impact. So we went through the whole franchise fee allocation model. Any interest income we make goes straight to our reserve balances, any money we get from developer levies. So this number is a lot bigger, but it's really these three green ones that I believe council may want to look to. These are really the most discretionary transfers to reserves, and that would include the transfer to the asset rehab and replacement reserve for a total of $950,000, the transfer to the general capital reserve for $500,000, and the transfer to the flood mitigation reserve for $200,000. So those are some items we could look to. And so this top section here is again from the previous presentation that shows the impact at 6.5% for again each of these 100,000 in assessment, and then the 2 sample residential households at 700,000 and $1 million. And so we can see those were the impacts I just went through previously at 6.5%. If I redid that same table at the 2.5%, then we would be looking at, you know, slightly less than half of that impact. So instead of $14 an increase per 100,000 of assessment, we'd be looking at $6. For this sample household at 700,000, we'd be going from 100 to 38. And similarly for the sample household at $1 million, the annual increase would drop to 55. So that would be if we were to use most of the surplus available to reduce 2021 taxes exclusively. I do also have a calculator ready. I'll stop my presentation here in a minute. And if council wants to look at any other amounts, less than $1 million, we can kind of play with any of those kinds of scenarios to see what different levels of draw would do to our proposed tax increase. So that was kind of the preparation we had done in anticipation of this coming up, and knowing that we have a bit more information at this point in time than we normally would if we were doing this approval at the normal timeframe in December.
Great, thanks for having that prepared. Councillor McCallum, you have a question.
Thank you, Mayor Barman, and thank you for your presentation, Ms. Richardson. I was just wondering if you could give us some of the highlights as to what makes up the surplus this year.
Sure. So I'm doing this off the top of my head, and again, nothing's final. Some of this might change. Council may recall the most grant money came in the fall towards the end of the year. So we'd already made a significant number of operational changes to try to handle the impacts of COVID. There were significant expense savings that were sought from departments in order to offset the significant reduced revenues we were expecting, particularly due to the loss of recreation revenue. And then we got the most money quite late in the year after some of those operational decisions had been made. So we left, I don't have it in front of me, but if I go back to how the motion was worded, we did leave, I believe it was $300,000 of the most grant money in our operating budget for 2020, knowing that we were expecting expenses to continue for the last portion of the year. And what we saw is that facilities closed again. We already had supply purchases and some of that. So we actually have extra grant money that we left in our operating budget to cover COVID expenses, and ultimately expenses for the last portion of the year were less than we had anticipated. So we kind of have a surplus from the most money. That being said, throughout the rest of the year, we do have significant lost revenue and incremental expenditures, so that there's no concerns around needing to give any of the grant back. We definitely have more than enough to justify keeping that most money. It's just how we handled it within the budget. So that was one, again, kind of new, us trying to figure COVID out and just how things were changing throughout the year. Council may also recall we had the multi-year budget. So we had an approved 2019 and 2020 budget, and the plan was that managers could operate within their kind of 2-year budget. So I think that's only maybe the second time, that predates my time with the town. But we could have these carryovers, and I think that was only maybe the second time that managers could do that. So as long as they were within their 2-year approved budget overall dollar value, they could carry over money from 2019 to 2020 if they had work that for whatever reason they weren't able to get through. They had to provide a reason and have a plan to address it in 2020. But again, that was before we knew what was coming in terms of COVID. So there was about 600,000 in carryovers that was for work that managers and supervisors had planned to do that ultimately was never spent in 2020. They were given the opportunity to carry it over. It was for critical work that we wanted to get done. but ultimately that money was never spent. So that was 600,000 in money that was carried over that we didn't use. And then generally across a number of items, I think really in response to the COVID pandemic, our managers and supervisors really tightened their belts, and we didn't spend the amount that we had anticipated in some areas. So, you know, given the year that we had to end up, I think our surplus from 2019, if memory serves, was 1.7 million. So we're down from where we were in 2019 in kind of the similar range we've been historically. And I think it was just all the uncertainty from the year that really led to us ending up with that surplus and the conscious kind of savings we intended.
Gotcha. That's great. Thanks very much.
My recollection, Ms. Richardson, over the years, several years past, the annual operating surplus has generally come in around 2% of the approved budget, which I think we all recognize is it's pretty tight budgeting when you're talking about a budget size of the town of Canmore, and recognizing that we can't budget for a deficit. So knowing that and having that history to look at, and recognizing we still don't know what to expect with COVID, do you think, maybe this is too early for you to weigh in on, that the 2021 operating surplus may be in the same range as we've seen over the last several years?
I wish I had a crystal ball to answer that. You know, I think throughout the finance committee meetings, a huge amount of thought has gone into the budget we're putting in front of you today. It really is our best guess of what's possible. We've been very conscious of not wanting to tax any more than necessary. But you know, even the assumptions from when we started preparing this budget to now, I think, as I referenced when looking at the tax stabilization reserve and needing some flexibility there, is this didn't plan for 2 months of our recreation facilities being closed again, and some of those pieces. So best laid plans have often not been to plan. So I'd be very reticent to guess where we'll be at the end of this coming year. That being said, you know, there, as you mentioned, historically, we have always erred on the side of ending with a surplus rather than a deficit through our management of our financial position throughout the year. You know, based on that history, that would be if I had to guess. But again, who knows what this year will hold.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to put you in the position of having to gaze into a crystal ball. So recognizing that how council in the future directs the operating surplus that you've described that we'll be dealing with shortly. If council were arbitrarily to reduce the transfers to reserve in this budget we're being asked to approve, that could be made up within a couple of months when the operating surplus is before council to direct. Just speak about that a little bit, that the fact that the timing is off. I mean, we're approving the budget today. Council has clearly indicated through previous discussions that we want to continue to fund the reserves. That's very important to keep the reserves at a healthy level. And if council chooses not to do those transfers to reserves through the budget today, speak a little bit how that could play out in the near future when the surplus comes to council for discussion.
So I guess that's the unique position that we're in, that we've kind of based this analysis on, is because we have, and I would say a fairly high level of confidence that we will, at the end of the year, once everything is final, be coming back with a surplus of, again, somewhere in that range of around $1 million. We kind of have that advantage of foresight with the decisions that council has in front of them today. So what that would look like in this analysis here is that we could look to take some of these reserve contributions out of the tax supported budget at this point, knowing that they can be replaced with that surplus allocation that will be coming forward at the end of April. That's when that meeting is scheduled. So we have that advantage of foresight that we know that we can still get our reserves to the level that this budget planned to get them to. And whether council chooses to use, and I'm just going to go back to this, we based it on $1 million to leave a buffer, and that would reduce it to 2.5%. But again, I think you were referencing there the future impacts of that. The challenges in the 3-year plan we've proposed, and as a finance committee, you had all deliberated on the level of those reserve contributions that are really required to set us up financially for the future. And just, and so then if we do this significant reduction in 2022 to reduce taxes in the current year, again, barring any other decisions in 2022, those contributions are intended to increase every year, some of them to address the continuing needs of particularly our asset replacement and rehab reserve and maintaining our critical asset base. And so for those to then become part of the tax supported budget really drives a significant increase then in 2022, unless again, further draws from reserve or other funding sources are looked at. So again, that's why I wanted to have the calculator available. I can stop the presentation and we can look at that too, to look at if we didn't use this full amount in 2021, we could obviously use any amount less than that. And that would leave money available for other reserve contributions and help smooth some of, again, that significant change that we'd then be looking at from 21 to 22, if that helps.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm sure council would like to go through that exercise. And I had been intending to forward a motion later to reduce contributions, both asset replacement and the rehab reserves, asset replacement and rehab reserve by $500,000 and general capital reserve by $500,000. But it would be a good exercise at this point to consider other opportunities. So it's great that you're prepared to work through that with the spreadsheet. Councillor McCallum, you have a question.
I do. I have a couple actually. So, and all related to what we're discussing. I was wondering if we decided this year to not do 2-year budgeting. Do you believe that next year we will re-engage, or I guess it's this year, re-engage in 2-year budgeting again?
Ms. Rogers is coming in.
I think it might be too early to tell. I mean, really the main reason that we did not proceed with that 2-year budget was because of the significant uncertainty that we're facing as a result of COVID. And as we continue to go through the year, I think we'll have a better sense of what we're looking at there. There's no question that 2-year budgeting is a more efficient process and does allow both on the capital and operating side for a better distribution of expense. But with the uncertainty that we had this year, it just did not make any sense to do that. And as you see with recreation facilities largely still closed, that wasn't factored into the current plan that we have. So already before you've approved the budget, we've had some significant change.
No, that makes sense. I just thought I'd ask and understood where administration was at in terms of when they would recommend that next. And my next question is, can you remind me what our original planned increases were within the 2-year budgeting process? So in 2020, I believe it was like 4.5 for 2020 and then 5 for 2021, or was it both 4.5?
Mr. Irwin, I'm not sure if you're in the background here and can pull this.
Of course he's in the background.
Yeah, I have my presentation up, but he can work his wonders behind the scenes. But that is my recollection, is we were quite close to the numbers you were just stating there, Councilor.
I believe so. I don't have it in front of me. So sorry, it was what we originally.
Yeah, what was our original increases, Mr. when it was planned for 2020 and 2021 before COVID? It was I feel like it was 4.5 and 5 or 4.5 and 4.5.
It's going to take me a few minutes on that one, but it's pretty close to that. It's not
Okay.
far off that for sure.
All right, perfect. And so what we've ended up with, it was in 2020, 0. And originally, before any of the mitigations were in place, it was 8 before it came to 6.5. No, 8.5 before it came to 6.5. Okay. Excellent. And then my next question is about service review. So at budget committee, there was some discussion around the idea of doing a service review in the coming years or year. I don't know. And I'm wondering if administration has had more time to consider that and determine when they think that would be a good time to start that up.
We had actually had that conversation at the council strategic planning session, and yeah, it was just a week ago and have not had that.
Pushes together, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. There's been a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
So we are still working on the best way to bring that forward. I don't have any update for you today.
Okay, right, perfect. So to return to where you were at, Mayor Barman, in terms of looking at alternative scenarios, I am going to propose that we look at the original scenario that we had proposed for 2021, understanding that that 6.5 is basically 2 years worth of taxes squished into one with a whole lot of reductions. But I'm not personally comfortable with the next council being stuck with an 11% increase. So I would love to look at other scenarios. And I thought we might consider one that the community might be already familiar with, which was 4.5.
To that point, I wondered, Ms. Richardson, if you could use your spreadsheet and give us an idea of what it might look like if there was a motion to reduce contributions to the reserves by 300,000 each rather than 500,000, how that would play out.
So this is not going to be particularly pretty, just as this new information has kind of evolved. This is kind of the spreadsheet that Mr. Irwin, myself, and the rest of the administration team have utilized. So I've hidden a lot of the extraneous detail here, but it does allow us to kind of at a glance look at some of those different scenarios. So if we were to look at, as you had just proposed, if we were looking at 300,000 reductions in each of those two contributions for, you can see my bad typing here in real time. But if we were to look at a total reduction in the reserve contributions of 600,000, we can see that that would drop us to 4.1%. So again, higher than or lower than the 6.5. Higher than the 1 million I had in the slides that would drop us to 2.5. And then we can also see the corresponding impact there in 2022 and how that increases. So sorry, that's 600,000. And so that's the corresponding decrease in 2021 and increase in 2022. 500,000, I think, takes us to the 4.5 that you're referencing, Councillor McCallum, and would take us to 9% in 2022. So that's kind of how this works, and I can kind of put in any values that we might want to.
Okay, so on the reverse then, seeing how it impacts 2022, we have, let's play with that $1 million number, that round number. If we were to look at inserting 500,000 in 2021, as you have here on the screen, and then the remaining 500,000 in 2022, understanding that we're not doing 2-year budgeting. So this isn't actually something that is firm, but we wouldn't be able to hold those dollars within the tax stabilization reserve and leave them there for the next council to make the determination in 2022 as to how they would like to reduce that tax number. Again, I understand completely. We have no control over what future councils are going to do, but I do feel it behooves us to leave, to do the best we can for the future council, whoever that might be. And so that's what we would have. So it would be 4.5 in 2021 and 7.1 in 2022. Is that what that mitigation would provide us with?
Correct. So you're talking,
Okay,
about, just so I understand
yes.
flow here. So we would do a $500,000 reduction. And again, we can speak about what reserve or mix of reserves council might want to look at for that, but we'd be looking at a $500,000 reduction in reserve contributions in the 2021 budget and a lowering of our tax requirement accordingly by
Right.
500,000. And again, at council's discretion in April, but at this point, potentially with the intent of replacing that 500,000 with the surplus allocation at that point. The other 500,000 of the surplus, and again, it'll be somewhere in that range, you're envisioning would go to the tax stabilization reserve, and then we would do another draw from the tax stabilization reserve in 2022.
I do see how, again, it just kicks it down the can though at 2023, you're looking at 6.8. So it really, it has a smoothing effect, but it has a smoothing effect where it just tips over the, well, halfway really between 5 and 10%. And I guess that for me is where my inquiry over service review moving forward, because I think that that would be a really important conversation combined with the 2020 tax setting or budget setting. Those two initiatives combined could really prove to be a valuable tool for that future council to try and bring that 7.1% number down even further. And then subsequently 2023 and beyond. Anyways, that's those were my questions. Thank you for letting me play.
Are there any scenarios that,
Pardon me?
sorry, I was just going to ask if there were any other scenarios at this point that council would like to examine. Otherwise, I can stop my share of.
Well, let's leave that on the screen if you can for a minute. It's interesting to be able to see in this way the impact down the road of making a decision for this year. Clearly, council will want to keep the tax increase as manageable as possible for 2021, given that there's still so much uncertainty around COVID. But it's also germane to recognize that what we do with that will have a direct impact on, possibly a direct impact on tax requirements in future years. Of course, those future years will be up to the next council to manage, given that there are a number of options within budget approval process to manage those impacts. Councillor Mara, you have a question.
I just have a quick question. If this was to move forward and it would be up to the future council in 2022, if there was a surplus also in 2022, they could add to that number, correct?
Not at budget approval time typically.
No.
Budget's approved early. There could be an assumption, but
Yeah.
generally the budgets are approved early or before there's that much certainty about what the surplus might be. Ms. Richardson, you could jump in and speak to that.
Yeah, as Ms. Rogers had spoken to, we're still looking at what the next budget process will look like, whether we're able to return to a 2-year budgeting process with the uncertainty we have, also knowing a new council is coming in. But I believe our intent at this point would be to return to our more typical budget approvals, which would mean that again, depending on how the rest of this year goes, but we would be looking to have budget approval and finance committee meetings November, December of this year, which we're back into that scenario of just being slightly too early to have a good sense of that surplus, to have that information inform the decision-making around the budget. So there's just a little bit of a timing disconnect that usually makes that quite challenging.
But I think to your question, Councillor Mara, given the scale of our budget and the fact that we can't budget for deficit, it's a reasonable assumption that there will, without any other unforeseen circumstances, there will be some sort of an operating surplus, whether it continues to be in the million plus range or not is really gazing into the crystal ball. But each year, this is an exercise for council to go through, is to tweak, if you will, where monies go to and where they come from. Councillor Hillstead, you and I had a chat recently about this conversation. Do you have any other questions about what we're looking at right now?
Councillor McCallum's question essentially answered my question. I was just looking at slightly different numbers, but I basically somewhere between 500 and maybe slightly more. Again, I have the same thoughts as Councillor McCallum, where if we go too much, then we're just really hindering the next council. As if you did the whole $1 million originally presented, that's quite a heavy burden for the next council to deal with the 11%. So, yeah, like if you with that scenario, it's much higher. Just to try to get the smoothing to come back, it's a lot more play that has to happen. So I was just trying to think of numbers in my head that would work, but 500,000 seems like a good spot. You know, could we go more, potentially less? Again, it's kind of up in the air. So for me, as it's been pointed out, like once the surplus is known for sure, then it may be even higher than the 1 million. It may be the 1.3. So that also can come into play later. But at this point, we don't know that surplus, so we're not playing with that exactly. So we're just looking at the other options for reducing contributions to different reserves. So yeah, my question's been answered with Councillor McCallum's previous.
Okay, if there's no further questions on this specific issue, I will, when we get to motions, put a motion.
Councillor Sanford had a question.
Oh, I'm
Mayor
sorry.
Gorman.
Didn't see your hand, Councillor Sanford.
It's not about this particular issue. So.
Okay.
Oh,
Sorry, Mayor
So-
Gorman, could I just, it's Teresa, I just wanted to add in a reminder that we are planning some fairly substantial draws on that tax stabilization reserve in 2022 and beyond, again, as Ms. Richardson had indicated this morning, to help with that smoothing on the impacts of the RCMP contract and fire. So just didn't want to lose sight of that as you're having a discussion about next year. We currently have 550,000 already coming from that reserve in 2022 and 625,000 in 2023. So again, just to highlight that.
I think your message is clear. Just be cautious. Other questions on this specific issue? Councillor Comfort, did you have another question about this?
I did. So my recollection is that 2022 is a big year for spending for capital projects, is it not?
2022 is the most significant year of the 5-year capital plan because of the construction of the fire hall, primarily at 14 million.
And the pump house upgrade.
Yeah, some big utilities projects as well. That is correct.
So the pump house upgrade, is that related to future development then? Is there any offsite levy money there?
That is a great question. Ms. Smith.
Some of it is attributable to growth. However, some of it is just maintenance for the existing population. Off the top of my head, I don't recall what proportion is attributable to growth, but I believe it's less than half.
Less than half?
I believe. I'd have to check. I don't want to spit.
I'm just feeling things out. You know, what's indicated here clearly, the biggest effect of trying to reduce taxes in 1 year substantially or critically, just as everybody said, kicks the can down the road. Somebody else then has to pay, but those things have to be paid by everybody, and it's got to be. And I think the smoothing out aspect is good. So thank you for doing all these extra calculations, Ms. Richardson.
Right. If there's no other discussion required at this point on this issue, I will introduce a motion later in the meeting around this, and which, as I had indicated earlier, the motion that I have intended to put on the table was essentially to reduce both the asset replacement and rehab reserve by 500,000 and the general capital by the same amount. So when that motion's on the table, of course, any councillor could, through an amending motion, change those numbers, but it'll just get the possibility on the table. And now through this exercise, we have some better understanding of how things play out in the future, depending on if there is a reduction in transfer to reserves this year. I had another, did Councillor Sanford, you said you had a question about something else? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. My question, Ms. Richardson, is in relation to that bylaw vehicle that you said we had under budgeted for. The extra budget for that would be coming from the photo radar reserve. Is that correct?
Mr. Irwin, can you help me out with how you funded that diff?
Yeah, it's funded through the photo radar reserve. So the extra would be coming from the same source?
Yes, it was all funded from photo radar.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was my question.
Okay, thank you. Since you brought that bylaw vehicle up, when I was going through the capital budget the last time, I was looking at that line item, and I can't recall from the discussion whether that proposed new vehicle for bylaw was meant to be an EV, or was it a gas vehicle? I don't recall.
Ooh, I don't know.
I can speak to that. And the answer is we don't yet know. And Ms. Smithers, please feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. So bylaw is working with Streets and Roads on doing the analysis of the cost. What's the right size vehicle that we need for the work, and then the cost of the difference between a purely electric vehicle, a hybrid, and a diesel or regular gas vehicle. So that analysis is still being done. We don't yet know exactly what vehicle we'll get, but we are looking at options there. And that's something that once the decision is made, we could report back to council on the outcome and why we decided what we did.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the capital project anticipated a hybrid. So there is, as Ms. Cottle, Dr. Cottle mentioned, work being done. I also wanted to point out, sorry, I was confusing Pump House 2 and South Bow River Loop for some reason. Pump House 2 is 100% allocated to future growth. So while it is funded up front, we do recover those costs over time as growth happens in the community. Sorry about that.
That's okay, thank you. I have a question related to the council operating budget, which is on page 38, I think, of the agenda. One of the line items in the council operating budget is other, and it's budgeted for 2021 at 14,000. I don't recall, again, I don't recall if there's a lot of detail that went into that other line, that 14,000 for other. I don't know if Mr. Irwin or if there's any.
Yes, that's the amounts for the council allocations of your individual budgets. I don't have it in front of me, which you reduced this year.
Right. So
that's all budgeted in other, because we don't know during budget time whether it's going to be spent on conferences or travel or those kind of things.
And
so
if I recall,
it's put into other. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. My recollection was that 5,000 of that line item was related to the contribution the town's made over the years to Canada Day breakfast. Is that right?
That's actually in hosting. That's actually budgeted.
Oh, that's in hosting.
Oh, which would be rolled up into your page, into administration in general, probably.
Admin and general services.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so we have a $5,000 budget item in admin and general services for possibility of a contribution to the Rotary Canada Day breakfast. Council, I think, is aware that there's been a request from the Rotary Club to set aside, if you will, more than that, 12,500. And I could leave this for discussion at the debate, during a motion debate. I don't know if there's any discussion that's needed at this time to better understand that, but I understand that I guess this is more of a debate. So Councilor McCallum, do you have a question regarding the?
Absolutely, I do. Let me help you. I have a question. Originally, I think we had told them, or we had embedded $5,000, I believe, into the budget for them. And now there is an additional request asking for the full 12.5 in anticipation that perhaps COVID restrictions will have lifted and that they'll be able to put on the full budget. Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah, but I didn't want to get into
Perfect. So my question is, can administration remind me what plans we have set out and how that is reflected in our budget with regards to arts and events, doing community events such as Canada Day, Party on the Pond, or what events we have organized for 2021?
Yep, I can do that. So we have organized for 2021 a reduced and assuming COVID Winter Carnival, National Indigenous Peoples Day, Canada Day, and Party on the Pond. So with the exception of Party on the Pond, all of the budget lines for those other three events have been reduced because we are not anticipating, and I believe Ms. DeSoto knows more about this than me, but the province has been clear that it will not be events as usual this summer, that if there are events, they will still be under COVID restrictions. So I don't yet know what the plan is for Canada Day. Arts and Events is currently planning, and I think waiting to see what the announcements are in the next couple of weeks. We're still waiting some guidance from the province on what events might look like. So there will be something for Canada Day, but it will not be normal. It will be COVID. It assumes COVID.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. That was my question, Your Worship. Thank you.
Yeah, and on that thought, if there is a Canada Day celebration, Ms. Cottle, the special events never has a financial role in the pancake breakfast, is that right? That's autonomous to the town of Canmore?
Yes, so the Canada Day committee, every Canada Day is actually elements of that, what we normally do on Canada Day. Some are hosted by the town and some are hosted by the Canada Day Committee and the Rotary Club. So the pancake breakfast and the fireworks are not actually town of Canmore events, although we do provide funding to the Canada Day Committee for some elements of the fireworks. And it's the same with the pancake breakfast. That is not a town of Canmore event, but we have historically provided funding for it.
Okay. Councillor Comfort, you had a question on this?
I do. Can someone explain to me the difference between, say, the funding that goes to Rotary and the funding that goes to the Canada Day Committee? How are those two entities the same and how are they different?
I can try. I mean, they are not the same, right? They're two different organizations. I'm assuming you all know what the Rotary Club is. And then the Canada Day is a committee of volunteers, and they specifically work on Canada Day events. So in the past, they've had the Toonie truck as part of the parade. They've helped organize bands. They have organized, lately what it's turned into is that the town of Canmore does the parade, and we fully pay for and fund the parade through our budget. And then they have been doing the after parade events. So the events that happen in Centennial Park, sometimes that's live music, those types of things, and the fireworks. So it is a committee of volunteers who organize, provide the human resources, and fully execute those events. For fireworks, there are some supports from the town, but the recruitment of the volunteers, and it's completely separate and run by that committee. The Rotary does only the pancake breakfast as a fundraiser and a community event. So they are, while it's all activities that happen in one day, the Rotary does the breakfast, the town does the parade, and the Canada Day Committee does the afternoon and evening events. So there is coordination among all three, but in the last few years, we've really worked to tighten up the lines and the roles and responsibilities so it's clear who is in charge of what.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Hillstead.
If we were to give the 12,500 that Rotary's requesting, and Canada doesn't go as in, from the optimistic way that they're thinking with the full pancake breakfast, is there any way that we could have it so that, it's contingent on a full Canada Day parade so that if it doesn't go there, the money comes back?
The money wouldn't go anywhere unless the Rotary Club actually was mounting the breakfast. So it would stay in the town's coffers until required. The cost, that cost is entirely associated to the costs charged by the Calgary Stampede Group to bring out their crew and all their equipment and to actually run the pancake breakfast. The Rotary members serve basically as pancake flippers and that's it. So if the money was there in under the council operating budget, it would sit there for the rest of the year if there is no Canada Day breakfast. It would only, and I see Ms. Rogers with her hand up, so maybe
No, you're correct on that. I just wanted to speak about the amount.
so the impact of the Rotary Club is they can't apply to the Stampede to have this happen unless they're certain that the money is there. So by having this put in abeyance in our budget allows the Rotary Club to at least kick this into an action, and if it's possible on July 1st to do it, then great. My guess is it won't be possible, and it'll become a moot point that additional money that if we put additional money into the admin and general services account, it would sit there until the end of the year and then perhaps become part of a surplus.
Thank you.
Councillor Seeley and then Ms. Connell.
Yeah, it's my understanding through the letter that they're requesting up to 12,500. So the whole amount doesn't need to be necessarily spent depending on what the Stampede charges, and it's a per plate venue.
But in order for them to apply to the Stampede to do this, they have to know they have access to 12.5.
Yes.
Ms. Cottle.
Well, and I think there's also a larger philosophical question here, which is, their council could also have a discussion about the town's role in the pancake breakfast and other ways of managing. So, currently you can come and it's pay by donation. And so you don't have to pay, right? You could just come and eat. And there are other options. Council could decide this is the amount we want to spend. And then after that, the breakfast would end. So it would be a certain amount. Right now, my understanding is the way that breakfast runs is that they, serve anybody who shows up instead of saying this is the amount that's available. So I guess I'm just suggesting there's the Rotary ask is based on past attendance. That's one way to address the question. Council could, if you want to have a different conversation, there's another way to look at what is the contribution the town wants to make, and then ask the Rotary to work within that budget.
Right, you are. Any other discussion, Councillor, Ms. Rogers? I almost made you a councillor.
No, thank you. I did just, and no offense, I did just pull up the detail of the budget. As you know, that's not represented in the book. Historically, we have provided $10,000 to Rotary, and that is what is in the plan as well for 2022 and 2023. So the 12.5 is slightly above what we had historically provided or are planning for in the future budget. Nuance, but just wanted to point it out because you don't have that level of detail there. Sorry.
Right, thank you. So the 2021 budget is reduced because of the whole COVID uncertainty.
Correct.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. So I would just want to confirm that if we were to change the number from 5,000, which is what we have embedded in the draft budget, to 12,500 that we would actually have to tax for those additional $7,500. Is that correct?
That would be my expectation, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
If there's no other discussion on this issue, there'll be a motion put on the table so that we can debate and vote on that, and I look forward to hearing that debate. Are there other questions from members of council around the, the operating budget particularly, or Councillor McCallum? Sorry, Ms. Rogers, you had a question or a point?
I just had a response to Councillor McCallum's earlier question about the future year budgets. What was originally in the plan? 2021 was originally planned at 4.6% and 2022 at 4.3%.
4.6. Thank you.
Mr. Irwin messaged me, and at 2020 was at 4.8. So
Okay.
my other question was, there's two other, so we've just had a nice discussion around the Rotary Ask. Do we want to have similar Q&A question around a couple of other topics that affect the operating budget, Your Worship?
Yeah, this is the time to be asking
Yeah,
questions.
perfect, yeah. So the citizen satisfaction survey is something that was removed by budget committee, and I'm just wondering, so that it's funny because in my head I had $26,000 already. That's what I had in my notes, but apparently it was 19,000, and then it went up to 26. So I don't know if I dreamt that number or what, but that is the magic number that has been in my head all along. And so this item, I was having a conversation with Ms. Richardson about this, as it is inserted in our operating budget. But because it doesn't happen on an annual basis, it originally came to us as a capital budget item, I believe, I think in my first term. And so I'm trying to understand how it migrated from being, we just decided to operationalize it every 4 years, how it moved from being a capital project to, capital budget to it being embedded in the operating budget.
I can speak to that. I don't actually recall it being a capital project, but we did used to be on a more frequent cycle, which is why it was in that operating budget. So there was a time when we were doing that survey every 2 years rather than every 4. And so it really seemed to fit better as an operating item.
Okay. Okay. And then in terms of the surplus policing position that we fund through Photo Radar, this is obviously not a change if council were to approve removing this this position. This is not a change that would be reflected in the 2021 budget, but it is a process that we have to start. We have to give the RCMP notice. I believe it's 12 months notice. And so it wouldn't affect this budget, but if council were to choose to support an amending motion, it would affect the 2022 budget. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, Dr. Cottle. I don't know if you have further information on that, but I believe there is a process. So at this point, that wouldn't come into effect for the 2021 budget. But if council wanted to give the direction for us to start pursuing that, then we could look at that.
Okay. I was considering bringing that as a motion after we have reviewed all of the motions that admin has put forward, the 4 motions that are sitting on our agenda. I would bring that forward because it is outside of our current 2021 process. Does that make sense procedurally?
Ms. DeSoto?
Couple of thoughts. I believe it would impact the 22-23 plan. So, we could have your motion be considered before making those motions around the future year plans.
Okay.
And then it would impact the tax rate for those plans as well. And if I may, because I have the mic, I just wanted to respond to Councillor McCallum's previous question around why the citizen satisfaction survey is in the operating budget. And Ms. Rogers is quite correct. We used to do it every other year. And on the alternating years, we would do a census. So they were approximately the same amount of money. And so we kept them in the budget: census, satisfaction survey, census, satisfaction survey. And then over the last number of years, we've sort of been using those as budget reduction items.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So, hold on, remind me. So where in all these motions and decision-making would you like me to insert this change or this proposed change?
I think you could do it at any time as part of the deliberations before you vote on the final budgets.
So it would be, you would probably want that in recommendation 2 as part of the debate around the 2021-2023 operating planning summary?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Councillor Comfort, no, that's not your hand. Anybody else have questions? Ms. Scottle?
Just for clarity, the RCMP position is funded through Photo Radar. So I don't believe it would affect the tax rates for the plan, but it would affect the amount in reserve unless we're going to use that reserve to offset the bylaw officer as an example.
That was kind of where my head was at when we had this discussion before. I don't know if I have to make that implicit in the motion or if that's just something that is naturally most likely going to happen. There'll be some money Tetris happening when the plan is organized. It would align with the reserve policy to use the bylaw position from Photo Radar funds.
Yes, I believe it would, but I and maybe Ms. DeSoto can help here, but I think we would need council direction to apply that because the bylaw position is in the 2021 budget under taxes. So if council wants us to use the reduction of our CMP officer to offset that in a future year, that's where it would affect the tax rate. And I believe we would need that as direction.
Correct. Yes, we would, but that direction would affect the future year budgets, not 2021 again. Yeah. So yeah, that could all be part of your motion, Councillor McCallum, is the intent with that reduction in officer would be to apply that Photo Radar contribution to the bylaw services department.
Are there other questions at this time? Seeing none. Ms. Richardson, were you going to do any more overview on the capital budget or?
That concluded everything I had for today.
So then I'm looking for questions from members of council regarding both the operating budget and the capital budget at this time. And I see none. So is there more presentation or discussion that administration wants to lead?
That was all we had at this point.
Great. So it's call it 20 after 10. I'm going to call a short break, not so much a bio break, but get everybody that may be thinking about drafting a motion now a bit of time to make sure that they have their thoughts in order and the motion clearly drafted. So we'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 10:30. See you then. it appears that we are not quite all returned. I'll give Councillor Mara a second. There we have it. Okay, with that, I'll call the meeting back to order. And we have a number of motions to put forward. And the first motion I'll put on the table is that I'll move the council approve the 2021 operating budget and business plan as presented. I do have a couple of amending motions. I believe others do. So I'll put one amending motion forward, which is I'll move the council add $7,500 to the admin and general services line of council operating budget to be funded through taxes. And I believe Ms. Hyde has that prepared to share. Got to give her a minute because I just called her a few minutes ago to have that ready. Okay, I think the motion is clear to everyone, and I'll speak to the motion. I think we all recognize that the odds of there being a Canada Day pancake breakfast is very slim. But if it's possible, I mean, if we can do that by July 1st, the pancake breakfast is such a great event, and not only for our local residents, but for the thousands of visitors that are in Canmore for Canada Day Parade and everything. So I would like to provide the wherewithal to allow the Rotary Club to plan for that. And I understand that they need to have certainty that if it moves forward, the $12,500 in funding is available. If we don't have that in the council budget, then they can't plan for it at all. And I appreciate some of the comments earlier from the discussion around other funding models and the suggestion of charging a small amount to everybody who comes to avail themselves of the pancakes. I think those are very good suggestions. And if we are able to move forward, or if the Rotary Club is able to move forward with planning for a pancake breakfast in 2021, those conversations could be held. But if council doesn't in some place provide that possibility for the planning, then regardless of what happens with COVID, it just won't happen. So anyways, that amending motion's on the table for discussion. Councillor Mara?
I will support this. I think it's a great idea. Their Rotary Club is known to be community builders. I know that the chances are probably slim, but I know they're a creative group and maybe they'll come up with something creative to do something for the community. So I think I would be in favor of this.
For the discussion on the motion, Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'm also in favor of this increase, and based on the information that we got from Rotary to clarify what the funding was going to be used for, if they use the Stampede Caravan to come and provide the infrastructure to provide up to 3,000 breakfasts, it's a major undertaking for them to use that service. But that service, as I understand from the letter that they sent us, has to be provided at no cost because of the Stampede policy on that. So if they're going to use that infrastructure, they need to provide this service for free. And I understand from what Dr. Cottle said that there is a donation component to it, but I'm not aware of what that is. So we have to be considered that if we want to use that infrastructure, it has to be provided for free. So at some future date, maybe there's a conversation that can be had about reducing the numbers. But as we know, our Canada Day Parade is a really significant attendance factor. And, we should be inclusive with that and allow people to use those services, and I'm happy to support it. And I just wanted to also say that I have an application in with Rotary right now that's under review. So I'm planning to become a member, but I'm not a member yet.
Full disclosure. Thank you for that.
Full disclosure.
Councillor McCallum, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I appreciate everything that people are saying about this, but I really can't imagine that we would be able to gather for Canada Day based on the state of the world and based on the fact that we're not looking at having the majority of our population vaccinated until September. It just doesn't seem possible. And I appreciate that Rotary is trying to plan for the impossible, and I have a great deal of respect for that, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that these additional funds people are going to be taxed for. So yes, it could come back in a surplus, but this is probably not the year that we should be looking at trying to find extra ways to tax people. I think that if, based on the state of our healthy reserves, that if Rotary wanted to come back at another time and wanted to do something a little bit different, that we could look at taking those funds from, the tax stabilization reserve or the general operating reserve. But at this time, it just doesn't seem realistic. And I'm, trying to approve a pragmatic budget here, understanding that there's all kinds of checks and balances and push and pulls in our community. But I don't think that dreaming about hosting a Canada Day event this size with this many people is a particularly prudent way to move. And so I'll be unable to support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Seeley.
I will support this amendment. The Calgary Standard is an important partner to Canmore right now, and it's nice to have them out. There is an economic opportunity with this too, and it does add vibrancy to the community. So this important is very close to me, very important, and I will support this.
Just in response to Councillor McCallum's comments, and I think we all agree 100% that it's really unlikely that this will come to pass. The downside of approving this motion, if there is no pancake breakfast, is that there'd be $12,500 left in essentially a surplus in that line item for council, which presumably could be applied to reduce taxes the following year by council. Councillor McCallum.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. Am I misunderstanding? Is there not already $5,000 for Rotary embedded in this budget, in this draft budget? And you're looking at another, so there's already money there for them to do it if they want to. It's the extra $7,500 required to do a pancake breakfast where up to 3,000 people are going to gather in our downtown park in what will still be the middle of a pandemic.
Highly unlikely, you're quite right.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if Dr. Cottle popped up because she has a comment.
I just got new information. I apologize for entering at this time, but Ms. Bartolome has just made me aware that at this time, the Calgary Stampede is not accepting applications. They are not offering pancake breakfasts.
Okay.
So I just want the council to be aware of that fact.
Helpful information to have, in which case I will move to, can't remember, we've never done it before, remove my motion. Ms. Hyde, what's the motion to?
You can just withdraw the motion at this point.
So I'll move to withdraw this motion.
Yeah.
Does that need a vote?
No, it doesn't. We will record it in the minutes as a withdrawn motion.
Okay. Thanks for bringing that information forward, Dr. Cottle. So other motions for amendment from members of council? Councilor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I would like to bring a motion forward with regards to the citizen satisfaction survey. I believe Ms. Hyde has a copy. And I sent her a revised wording this morning. I'm hoping she received that. I think she did.
I think I did. So here, let me share it and you can let me know.
She's pretty on top of things, you know
I
that.
know, man. She's got her poop in a group.
I try.
So speaking to your motion, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Borman. So I think everybody knew that I was most likely going to bring this back. In light of the fact that we have discovered such a sizable surplus and that this number holds such an important data points for the community, I am reintroducing this to council. I understand the hesitancy in supporting this during budget committee. It at the time at first blush might have looked or seemed sort of unnecessary. But as I look through the citizen satisfaction survey, and by the way, I don't even like the term for that because it's not really about satisfaction. It's not really a popularity contest document. It's really allowing our citizens to provide response on a deep level as to which concerns they have in our community and which concerns they don't. And if there's something that I've really prided about our organization is we really try to make decisions based on data, not on our emotions or on sort of whims, but really on, trying to make sure that we have the information and the data to underpin our decisions to the best of our ability. And so with so many competing priorities right now in our community, I can see how sometimes it might be difficult to find focus in what is really important to our constituents. And I don't think that you can determine that in an election necessarily. That is a yes or no question. But there are many shades of yes or no within this survey. And so I am reintroducing it to my council, not necessarily as a tool for council, although it is a tool for council, but more of a tool for administration to help them understand where to focus their attention, particularly since we've been through the pandemic. And more importantly, as we look at the next year with and without, hopefully, COVID. So I'm reintroducing this item and I'm hoping to receive support from my colleagues.
Thank you for bringing that forward, Councillor. And we did have quite a discussion about this at the Finance Committee. I will support your motion. I agree with your assessment. The satisfaction survey, it's disappointing that we haven't had one in 4 years. It's such a helpful tool for council and administration to have a regular check-in with the residents of our community in regards to where we could improve and what is it that the residents feel we're doing well. That satisfaction survey was really meaningful, has been really meaningful in past years. And it's fairly scientifically managed. It's Ipsos that, well, in the past has done the work with random sampling. So I would join Councillor McCallum in encouraging other members of council to agree to fund the satisfaction survey for this year. Other discussion, Councillor Seeley.
I'll support this motion. I also find this survey very important, and it gives us an opportunity to check in with our citizens to see how we're doing. Regular process is between 2 and 3 years. If we let this slide, we'll be going into year 4, and I think that's too long. I do value what our citizens have said so far. It's a nice checkpoint, and I will support this.
And just to be clear, it has been 4 years since we've done one, and to your point, 2017. Yeah. And in the past, we did do it every 2 years, or tried to. Other discussion on the motion, Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for reintroducing this and giving us the opportunity to reconsider. this was my motion originally to remove it from the budget. And there's more than one reason. It is, can you remind me of the amount again? Was it $27,000, $26,000, somewhere in that region?
Somewhere in that
Originally,
region.
it was 19,000. It has now been, is 26,000. So 1/8 of a percentage point of taxes.
Okay, so sure. I think that the data that might be garnered from this year, taking the survey in this year, will be flawed because it's such an anomalous year. So my question, I guess I'd want to know if there's a possibility of creating some kind of algorithm or something that would take that anomaly into account. And we did it, what, 4 years ago? Did we do one during the flood year? I don't remember.
2017.
And then one before that was 16, 15?
Might have been one in 2015. I don't recall.
Okay.
14 and 12 before that.
Okay. Anyway, in a year where we're looking for every penny to meet our budget and to not raise taxes, I think we could let it go this year, and I would absolutely support it next year. And please, can we change the title? Can we talk about changing that title? Because otherwise it sounds like a popularity contest, that's all. So I don't know what else you would call it, citizen survey, just, whatever. But, and again, going back to the fact that we're going to have an election, and I said that was the ultimate popularity contest or satisfaction survey. But I'm happy to go with what my fellow councillors decide. I just think that that's enough money that could go to some other purpose or have a need filled. So I'd still let it go for this year, but have it come back in 2022.
Just to your point, Councillor, arguably the results of the satisfaction survey could well be used by the next council in deliberating the next budget to reduce tax demand in the next budget in response to what they've seen in the satisfaction survey. So if the survey says, what you're doing here is fabulous, don't need to do any more, or whatever the information is, the satisfaction survey does play a role in what we end up approving in the budget. So it could have a downward trend, for instance, in the next budget. But I take your point.
I get that, but I just think it's such a bizarre time and so much uncertainty that I think that the results you'd get would actually skew the data. But that's my opinion.
Well, that's what we're looking for right now is councillors' opinions. Councillor Sanford, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I don't think I can support this in this year for many of the reasons that Councillor Comfort just outlined. We will have a very difficult time of getting an apples to apples comparison of what we've done in the past. The pandemic has really impacted a lot of people, and a lot of the impacts have been very negative. So we've had to close many of our facilities, and beyond the ability of us to decide, we've had to make a lot of things happen that we wouldn't have chosen to make happen, but we've had to navigate them as effectively as we possibly could. But we do have limited resources, and we had to make difficult decisions about how to reallocate resources based on the information that we had at the time. And did we do it perfectly at the time? We don't know, because we had to make those decisions on very short notice, and our administration had to shuffle things to the best of our ability with not much input from any other source that could tell us exactly how to do things. So to come up with a citizen satisfaction survey right now, I think would be heavily impacted by a lot of negative experiences that people have had. And I don't think we'll get the best result from that. But I think in the spring of 2022, when we're through the most of the pandemic and we have a new council and we have a new elected election process, it might be a better time to get a citizen satisfaction survey for the next council to actually move forward more effectively with information that is being mitigated by better circumstances. So I won't support this right now just because of the pandemic and the impact that it's had.
Great, and I appreciate that argument as well. And on the other hand, one might consider that there's no better time to gauge the satisfaction of our community than in a year like this, where we've addressed unimagined challenges throughout our department. So in that context, I think how residents respond to the questions is even more telling. Here's how well you did in really difficult circumstances. Thank you very much, or whatever, or you missed the mark entirely. You know, you let the COVID situation impact too much in these other areas. So in that context, I think it is a good time to be doing a survey. Councillor McCallum.
I just wanted to clarify a few things that I've been hearing from my colleagues. So I'm not proposing that this item come from taxes. I'm proposing that it be funded from the general operating reserve. Secondarily, in other committees that I've sat on where they have done satisfaction surveys, what you're predicting is not actually playing out in the data. So people seem to be smart enough to be able to tease apart what is the town responsible for, or what the organization is responsible for versus what is just a state of the world at that time. And I would point out that there's no nuance in the election results. There's no real, outside of it really truly being a yes or no answer, there's no further commentary that you can put on your ballot when you file your ballot. And I think that actually this has the potential of allowing us to respond quite acutely to the needs of our citizens now, as opposed to awaiting a year later when the roughest patch has hopefully moved through our community. But in terms of being able to help Canmorites right now, this has the ability to be a tool for administration to do that. And I would point out that elections often leave out the disenfranchised, those that are not Canadian citizens that still pay taxes, and their voice is largely left outside of the conversation during the electoral process. That's all I had to add.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, Councillor Mara.
I would thank both people, our fellow councillors, for both sides of the conversation. And I'm just adding to the little bit to when this would come forward is in 2022, and it would be available for the new council, whoever it may be, to have a starting point and maybe able to set their groundwork. Is that sort of the idea that Councillor McCallum toward?
This would be in the 2021 business delivery, so the satisfaction survey would be conducted in 2021.
And the
but
information
it would certainly inform the next council's business.
Okay, that's right. Thank you.
And it would inform the current council's business, and more importantly, administration and affiliate partners' business.
Right. So further discussion on the motion, Ms. Rogers?
Sorry to interject. I just was looking at the funding, and the general municipal operating reserve may not be appropriate funding for this. It's for unforeseen general emergency expenditures or unanticipated operating expenditures. So just wondering if a nuance there, perhaps the tax.
Do you have a recommendation?
I would say the tax
I received my
stabilization
recommendation
reserve,
from Ms. Richardson, so that's why I came up with this pot of money.
Yeah, no, it's totally fair. We're kind of doing this on the fly, so sorry. Tax stabilization, I think, would be an appropriate replacement.
Perfect.
I mean, it's the same emergent, non-recurring nature, but it's probably more appropriate.
Ms. Hyde, would you mind making that change in the motion, please?
You did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have any further discussion on the motion? I'm gonna call the question. I see none. So those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillors Comfort and Sandford in opposition. Thank you. I'll put the motion on the table now regarding the what we talked about earlier. So I'll move the council amend the, and Ms. Hyde, you have this to share. Move the council amend the 2021 budget by reducing contributions to the asset replacement and rehab reserve by 500,000 and the general capital reserve by 500,000 and reducing the 2021 tax requirement by $1 million, therefore resulting in a reduction in the total municipal tax increase net of growth from 6.5% to 2.5%. And the motion's on the table. Discussion. Councillor Hillstad.
I would like to propose an amendment to your motion, just to change it from 1 million to 500,000 total, with 250,000 and 250,000 from the two reserves to bring it to 4.5%.
And speaking to your motion?
I just think that with doing 1 million and bringing it down to 2.5, as much as that looks great on paper, it kind of hamstrings the next council with a potential 11.5, I think it was 11.5% increase in the coming year. So this just smooths it out a little bit more, and just gives the next council a little bit better beginning point to the next budget. So.
Discussion on Councillor Hillstad's amending motion. $300, $250. Councillor McCallum.
I was doing a little dance there for your worship. I would be happy to support this amendment. I agree that 2.5% on its own looks fantastic, but it will absolutely hammer not only the council of the next term, but the community, in particular the business community, who have a 3-to-1 ratio that they'll be paying on this tax. So I think that I really hope that we have the ability to consider a service review for 2022. I also know that there's a future amendment that could make that 7 point, what was it for next year, 6.9, perhaps bring that down already further based on how my colleagues vote. But I really, I don't know if we can actually set the next council up for success based on what we're going through as a municipality, but we can certainly try. And leaving it at 2.5% is not setting the next council or the community for that matter up for success. We've seen in the numbers what this looks like on a per $100,000 basis, as well as in the average home right now. But I think that this is a responsible, prudent move. It does allow a future council to bring in more reserve if they want to from the tax stabilization to continue to smooth out over the future years while still leaving a considerable amount of money left in the reserve. And so I will be happy to support this.
Councillor Sandford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Yes, I will support this amendment. I think the reasons that have been given are quite good. And if we can bring it down to 4.5% when we started at 8, that's a very good reduction, but also without leaving a lot of liability and debt for the future would be favorable. So I think I will support this amendment.
And I saw another hand up, Councillor Seeley.
I'm leaning away from supporting this amendment. What I'm hearing is, well, we are in unprecedented times, and I appreciate everything we can do for this year. And understanding that next year we'll have to take a look at things, I would prefer to have a 2.5% increase this year and take a look at next year when it gets here and try to make some adjustments. We have been adjusting on the fly, and I do think that's possible. So I won't be able to support this.
I appreciate the arguments that have been presented in the amendment, proposed amendment. And we certainly had quite a discussion about that in the open part of the meeting. I was a little perturbed to see the continued impact for 2022. If the original motion has carried, then it would be a really significant reduction of tax requirement for this year, but leaving the possible tax requirement for the next year to be fairly high. So I'll support Councillor Hillstead's amending motion. Councillor Comfort.
I will also support Councillor Hillstead's amending motion for the reasons already stated.
Councillor McCallum, did I see you waving your hand? Nope.
No, Your Worship, drinking my coffee, sorry.
Okay. Is there other discussion on the Councillor Mara?
I too will support this, knowing that we did our best in 2020 to keep it to hold the line. And I think we've discussed quite a bit over the years, or over the couple of years, the smoothing checks. And I do also not want to hinder a future council, or knowing that there are other areas that we can maybe be more cost effective, but I accept this amendment and will support it.
Yeah, and you know, in all of these discussions around tax increases that we go through every year, I always boil it down to what's the real impact to the taxpayers. And I don't have the data in front of me that would reflect the impact to the average assessment from this change, but I know that it becomes a matter of somewhere around $10 a month. So it's, while it always sounds frightening to residents to read about, you know, percent increases like typically we do see, it's a bit misleading to talk about these matters as percentage increase, because what really matters is the actual monthly increase to cost for residents. And I know from having gone through these discussions many times, the monthly impact of this sort of a tax increase is not negligible. It's not to be dismissed, but it's not outrageous. So again, I'll support this amendment. It does leave more in the more opportunity for council's decisions next year. So if there's no further discussion on Councillor Hillstead's amending motion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor Seeley in opposition. Back then to the motion as amended. Is there further discussion on this amended motion, Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Further to what you were describing about the concern about a tax increase of 4.5%, for instance. We're actually talking about increasing the municipal tax requisition by 4.5%, not everybody's household taxes. And I think that's where people get confused, is they think their taxes are going up 4.5%. However, it's to the overall budget, and that overall budget has a lot of factors that affect it, as we've seen with growth and with other revenues and other costs that we have to incur. So the 4.5% doesn't necessarily mean everybody's everybody's taxes are going up 4.5%. So, you know, that's a narrative that I think we have to get used to.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note.
I mean, that is tax increase of 4.5%. So
to the overall municipal budget.
Taxes. So we have to collect 4.5% more taxes,
right?
Which effectively means residents' taxes are likely to go up 4.5%. There's a number of factors, you know, whether assessment goes up or down and other considerations like that. But
the assessments are the important aspect of it too, because assessments go up and down as well.
Yeah.
This impact.
I don't think it's reasonable to say that your taxes aren't going to go up 4.5% because that's the overall increase, because they are fairly tightly tied to each other.
Well, we'll see.
Regardless, is there any other discussion then on the motion as amended? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Did you have a question, Councillor McCallum? You're just getting ahead of the vote?
No, go ahead. Yeah, get ahead of it.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And thank you for that amendment, Councillor Hillstead. Are there other motions? I believe Councillor McCallum had additional motion.
Yes, Your Worship. So we're going into the second approval, over the 2021-2023 operating planning summary. Is that correct?
No, sorry. We're still on the first motion, approving the 2021 operating budget.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
So is there other amendments for?
No, my amendment would be for the second recommendation. But yeah.
Okay. Are there other amending motions for the first motion, which is to approve the 2020 operating budget and business plan as presented? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. Those in support of that motion as amended, those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I will now move that council approve the 2021 to 2023 operating plan summary for planning purposes as presented. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I have an amendment that I'd like to propose, and I believe Ms. Hyde has a copy of it. Thank you. So as you'll all recollect, we had a discussion at Budget Committee with regards to the surplus RCMP position that we fund through the photo radar reserve. This is a position that is above and beyond the allocation that we require to manage our population, and is one that has been subsidized through the photo radar reserve for years. In the 2021 budget, we just passed in operating an additional bylaw officer position, which is a position that I believe could be funded through the photo radar reserve, but we would need to eliminate this surplus RCMP position. Now, I know that there's always concern from the public when we talk about policing, but I would like to remind everyone that we do have the lowest severe crime rate in the entire province of Alberta. We also have a real need within our bylaw department to handle things related to our bylaws. And so I am proposing that council begin a direct administration to initiate the process of divesting of this position. The RCMP require 12 months notice to provide notice for this position. And if you recollect, administration reminded us that their tax year actually, or their budget year rather, goes April 1 to March 31st. So it would take 12 months from now. So this is not something that we would see reflected in the 2021 budget, but instead be embedded within the 2022 budget, with the dollars being reallocated to that bylaw position that we have approved in the 2021 budget, which effectively has the potential of reducing the 2022 tax increase as a result. So I am asking my colleagues to consider this. We did hear from our staff sergeant, which was really kind of him to come and speak to us. And I appreciate his concerns, but I am quite cognizant of the fact that the photo radar program itself does provide some relief to our RCMP in having to deal with some of those traffic measures, allowing them to focus their energy on other topics within our community. And I really believe that with everything that's happening with COVID, the amount of people visiting our wild spaces, and perhaps needing some policing with regards to recreating in our wild spaces and our green spaces, that bylaw position could be considered quite handy moving forward. So I ask council to consider my amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yep, that's me. So I have a couple of questions about this. My understanding was that we had to, the town, once its population goes over 15,000, that then our funding to the RCMP increases. Is that not correct?
That's correct. It's not, I don't think it's germane to what Councillor McCallum's asking, but yeah, our share of the policing budget will go up.
And where was that money going to come from? Was there any, knowing that that was coming, did we have a plan to fund it?
Yes, we've been identifying that future need by feeding some of the reserves to soften the transition, but I see Ms. Cottle wanted to give an answer to your question, Councillor.
I just thought I would remind you, Ms. Richardson earlier this morning was talking about the draws on the tax stabilization. We've known this is coming, and so that is the plan, is to ease in the transition to the 90% with tax stabilization. That is completely separate from Councillor McCallum's motion, which is the use of photo radar for one discretionary position.
In bylaw?
Completely unrelated. No,
but
the one position that is funded is right now is in the RCMP. She is suggesting we reduce the RCMP complement and use that funding to fund photo radar for the bylaw position. Yes. But there's currently no photo radar or tax stabilization used to fund bylaw. It's purely taxes.
And there's no photo radar or a discretionary fund to fund RCMP positions either?
In the future or?
In the current budget.
So in the current budget, as has been since 2008, there is one RCMP officer funded from photo radar. And then as of 2011, 0.5 of a position was made as a budget decision. So there is currently, and has been for years, 1.5 RCMP funded from photo radar. Councillor McCallum is suggesting an end to one of those positions.
I understand that. I just kind of wanted to clarify it for the public and for myself. Thank you, Ms. Cottle. Given that, I think I can support this actually. So I think we need more help in bylaw. It's certainly, we've heard that from the public, that there are never, where's a bylaw officer when you need them? So this may help fill that need. And I think that we need, as you said yourself, Mr. Mayor, more people on the trails, more people, more bylaw enforcement in different venues. So I think I could support this.
I'll note that this budget we just approved includes funding for an additional bylaw officer. So we are recognizing that need, and there will be an increase in the force available through bylaw. Councillor Seeley, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, I appreciate that we have a safe community, and I'm concerned that if we remove this position, it might impact that. We haven't had an RCMP increase since 2008. Staff Sergeant Singleton did come and speak. And there are some staffing challenges right now, including COVID, that are affecting them to get to the full complement. So I don't think this is an area that I'm comfortable removing, so I will be able to support this.
Yeah, I'll speak to the motion. I don't think I'll be able to support the motion. I do appreciate the intent. I recognize, though, as I just mentioned, that we are putting funding into increasing the bylaw department, which is really important. We have to have done this. I mean, that's an important thing to have done with this budget. But I recognize as well that past satisfaction surveys that we've been talking about, the community, it's one of the higher ranked, if you will, response categories. The feeling of safety in the town of Canmore is very high, far higher than average in Alberta. And that's partly because of our, as they call it, cop to pop ratio. So the number of police officers as a ratio to the number of citizens. And also we're recognizing that our visitor population is growing in leaps and bounds. So I don't know if this is a good time to be reducing our RCMP contingent. The presentation that we did have from Staff Sergeant, I understood from his presentation that even with the current member that they have on force, that there's still times when he's challenged to fill the shifts, to be certain that the scheduled shifts will be adequately staffed. In regards to funding by law, which is equally important, and growing in it's important again because of the number of visitors, day visitors particularly. Council is always able to fund additional resources to bylaw over and above what we've done with this budget. So yeah, I think it's important for a town like Canmore, a growing community and one that experiences so much activity, particularly in the summer months from visitors. I think maintaining the complement of RCMP officers that we have in place right now is an important, I think it's important to keep it as it is. The discussion on Councillor McCallum's motion, Councillor Hillstead.
I'm kind of torn on this one. I see the merits of Councillor McCallum's motion, but I also see the merits of keeping on that RCMP position, as it does help them keep the shifts in alignment. And I think with that presentation, I think there was 2 or 3 current RCMP officers on leave and potentially long term leave. So this just also, if we keep the position, it does give some flexibility to the RCMP in keeping their mental health. Just it allows them to, allow their officers to go on leave. And as Councillor Seeley stated, we haven't had an increase for many years now. I like the motion. I do want to support it, but I don't think I can at this point, just because I do think that the flexibility that position does give to our RCMP does help our town continue to be safe and to just help our RCMP members to keep their mental health and to just help them police our town, and just gives them the flexibility and helps draw officers and keep them in our community. So I think at this point I won't be able to support it.
Councillor, further discussion on Councillor McCallum's motion? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. So I would actually remind people that this surplus position wasn't actually meant to be a boots on the ground position. It was meant to be a community resource officer. So this position originally, when 12 odd years ago, was brought forward, it was meant to be able to work in the schools, which is actually not what it's been doing. I understand that there are officers on leave, but the reason why we actually contract out to the RCMP is for them to be able to handle that issue so that they can bring staff in to manage those problems. So much like we have EPCOR come, and if one of their engineers or one of their staff members is unable to work and has to go on long-term leave, they have this incredibly large backbench that they can pull from to be able to insert those positions. So as much as it's tough that the RCMP aren't able to fill those positions, that's a RCMP problem, in my opinion. They need to be bringing more staff members as we pay them to be able to manage this. And I would actually say that based on our crime rates, that we are overserved right now with our RCMP complement. We are not overserved, however, when it comes to our bylaw, and that is where we continue to see pressure. And so, yes, we have a position put in place for this year, which is great. But if we're truly wanting to look at savings in future years, we do need to look at our levels of service. And this is an overserved complement right now. We have our policing change coming up in 2015 with the census. We're going to be having to pay more for police, considerably more for police moving forward. And I feel like we have the ability to somewhat control that financially, because those costs are going to escalate. It's not just going to be policing costs with regards to the 90%. We're also looking at policing getting more expensive in general. And this is one way that we can basically affect the budget for 2022 for that future council, while at the same time keeping our community safe, which we do have the safest community in the province of Alberta when it comes to severe crime. So anyways, thank you for your time.
Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I concur with what Councillor McCallum has said, that we have a very safe community. And it was a good point about pointing out that position was originally supposed to be a liaison in the schools, and that didn't last very long and wasn't particularly effective. So I think that we are better served as a community to have our bylaw complement enhanced. So I will support this motion.
I didn't intend to go on in my arguments, but to that point, Councillor, we are a safe community because we have the complement of RCMP officers that we do have. And certainly bylaw is an important addition to those services. So if we hadn't already approved a new bylaw officer, then I might be feeling a bit differently about this discussion, but I'll continue to not be able to support the motion.
To rebut, Your Worship, I said to rebut your rebuttal. I think that I don't think that we're a safe community because we have a huge number of RCMP here. If the presenter is to be believed, most people are on leave. The complement is actually quite reduced. So just making that point.
Okay, I guess we could go on at length with this debate, but is there other discussion, councillors? Have the burning need to bring forward? If not, I'll call a question on Councillor McCallum's motion, which was on the overhead, but we all understand. Those in favor? And opposed? Motion is defeated with Councillors McCallum, Comfort, and Mara in support. Are there any other amendments being proposed to the second motion regarding the operating planning summary? Seeing none, I'll call the question then on the main motion, which was that council approved the 2021 to 2023 operating plan summary for planning purposes as presented. Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor McCallum in opposition. And I'll move the council approve the 2021 capital plan as presented. Is there discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council approve the 2021 to 2025 capital planning summary for planning purposes as presented. Discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we do have one last item of business on the agenda, which is item H2, the reserves policy amendments. Ms. Richardson.
I am back. Okay, so I'm going to try to get through this one quite quickly since I am conscious of our time. So related but separate to the budget approvals we just went through are the reserves policy amendments that are required, pardon me, as a result of some of the items that were discussed as part of the budget deliberations. As such, the motion is that council approve reserves policy Finance 007 as presented. So the purpose, as I'd mentioned, is that there are a number of revisions required to the reserves policy. So the first is to create the sustainability reserve, and that's in accordance with the franchise fee allocation model that was presented to the Finance Committee as part of the budget deliberations. Secondly, we have had a previous council motion for some time to create a paid parking reserve. And so while we aren't proceeding with the downtown paid parking, the decision was made to defer that to 2022 in light of some of the options that are being explored for paid parking at Quarry Lake. We decided to move forward with the creation of the paid parking reserve at this time so that that is set up. Next, there were some revisions to reflect some recent terminology changes. Those relate to Canmore community housing. And finally, there were just a number of other revisions for clarification or to reflect current practices as we opened up the policy. So first, and just as a comment, all of these changes are to the attached schedule. None of the changes are actually to the language of the reserve itself. These are all to the attached schedule. So first was the creation of the sustainability reserve. So the stated purpose of this reserve is to fund programs and projects to finance and promote energy efficiency, greenhouse gas reduction measures, and climate adaptation. The funding source is that this reserve will be funded through transfers from franchise fees. And there isn't a minimum or target level as this has a specified funding source, and the amount in the reserve at any given time will also depend on the work that's happening in this area. So similar to some of the other program specific ones, there isn't a minimum target level or a rationale associated with that. Next, we have the paid parking reserve. So the stated purpose of the paid parking reserve is to fund improvements in areas where paid parking has been implemented and or to fund fare-free transit services and or to fund off-site parking related infrastructure such as intercept parking or shuttle services. So a number of things that this reserve is intended to be used for. The funding source, as we've discussed previously, would be paid parking revenues net of the program costs. Similarly, as this would be kind of a program specific reserve, again, there won't be minimum or target levels. It'll depend on those paid parking revenues that come in and how much of those stated purpose type things we're funding from this reserve. So those were the two main items, the creation of those two. I've just lumped all of the other changes here together and I'll run through them quite quickly. So the corporate operating contingency, we changed the funding source language to reflect that transfers from municipal property taxes may not happen annually. That whole contingency relates to multi-year budgeting, as we're now doing single year budgets. We just kind of wanted to loosen that up a little bit. For tax stabilization, we changed the purpose to reflect that increases may come from emergent and or non-recurring items. The way it's written right now, it would need to meet both. And so that was another change. For the asset replacement rehabilitation, we changed the funding source language to remove the specification that it's only electrical franchise fees. As council may recall, we have the new allocation model that was looked at, and we're looking at franchise fees as a whole, whereas previously it was only electrical. So we're just removing that specification. Also, Canmore Community Housing has been changing their language to vital homes as opposed to the formerly perpetually affordable housing. So we just made that name change in what was formerly the perpetually affordable housing reserve to reflect that now it's vital homes. And finally, the offsite levy with some of the new MGA changes that allow for us to collect for more other types of projects, such as fire halls, recreation. We did have some quite specific language that projects must have been identified in the utility master plan or transportation master plan. So this is just to bring this language in alignment with our new offsite levy bylaw and the way that that's functioning now. So that summarizes all the other changes that were made in the attached schedule to that policy. And so that concludes everything I had on this today. And as a reminder, just the motion is that council approve that reserves policy as presented. Any questions on any of that? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you for that fulsome report. I'm just curious with the Vital Homes, formerly PH reserve policy. This is a connected but separate question. We have a PH policy on the books in general, do we not?
Correct.
So is there that at some point going to be coming to council for name change as well?
Yes, it will be.
All right, perfect. Thank you. That was only my question. Thank you, Ms. Richardson.
I think that was Ms. Smithers, actually. I got to phone a friend.
Thanks for the report. Are there other questions from members of council? Councillor Hillstead.
This is more just on the table in the revision history. I'm just wondering if because it just says inactive on today's date and then in effect, but the reserve policy number, nothing else changes. So I'm just wondering, should that actually be amended? It's on page 179 of the agenda package or page 4 of the reserve policy. I'm just, it's probably doesn't matter. I'm just curious as to, it's one of those weird things. Just when I was looking at it, just looked weird to me.
I'm just trying to pull it up here.
I'm wondering, Ms. Hyde, can you speak to that? Just on the revision history, should that be under amended?
Yes, sorry, I didn't have it open. I'm just opening it now.
There's a table at the bottom of the policy. Yeah, so the date, I think, should just be, instead of being under in effect, it should be under amended.
That's correct.
Under the column that says amended.
Sorry, that was an error on my part. I should have got that. Thanks.
Does that make sense, Councillor Hillstead?
Yeah, like just right now,
Yeah.
it's just, it goes inactive and then back into effect at the same time. So I figured something should be moved somewhere else, but I wasn't sure what.
Correct.
So
Any other questions or discussion? Councillor Mara.
I just have a quick question under the paid parking reserve. In the purpose, it says to fund improvements in where paid parking has been implemented. Does that include the downtown enhancement program or future? Is that something that would be drawn from there?
I think that, yeah, so that was what I was trying to capture with that language by kind of having the 3 stated purposes there. We wanted to give some flexibility there for as these programs are actually brought into implementation, what we are able to utilize those funds for. So now with downtown parking being deferred, that isn't necessarily at play in the current year, but for future years, I think that language would allow for those types of improvements to be included.
Thank you.
Are there other questions at this time from Ms. Richardson? Seeing none, thanks very much for bringing this report to council. With that, I'll move that council approve the reserves policy FIN-007 as presented. I'll certainly speak in support of the amended policy. And once again, say how happy I am that we've created a separate sustainability reserve fund. I think that's so important in doing the work that we envision and will help by having an identified reserve. It'll really help to bring certainty and continuity to the work that we intend to do to deliver on direction in the climate action plan. But in general terms, it's good to have these policies tightened up from time to time, and thanks to administration for doing this work. Is there other discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I'd be happy to support this motion. Yeah, I think that it is great that we continue to review our reserves every year and make changes as required and add new reserves as our priorities shift and change, which leads me to being also equally pleased with regards to the sustainability reserve. This was an idea that came out of the climate leadership course that I was chosen to participate with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And really, I feel that this provides transparency to the public as to the dollars that we have available to be really deliberate in our sustainability choices and changes. And so I'm happy to see that we have a dedicated funding to it, and that the reserve will allow us to control inflows and outflows, the reserve policy rather, inflows and outflows, and to just really action this item. I think that, our citizens really want to see themselves within our sustainability plans. And this is a way for them to see how the town is committed to our sustainability plans through the creation of this reserve. So overall, I'll be happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Yes, having served on the IRC committee for some years, and having seen the participation of citizens on that committee and the work that they put in for EISs and for scrutiny and for input, an incredibly skilled group, incredibly committed. And I can report that they are also happy to see this, and it's through their efforts this has come forward as well. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And just before adjourning the meeting, I do want to say one more time, express my gratitude for the amount of work that administration has done, particularly Ms. Rogers and Ms. Richardson, of course, in their roles. But this has been an unusual budget process and very complicated, more complicated than most budgets, which are always complicated. So I really do want to once again note the amount of work that's been put into this work and appreciate, voice my appreciation for the whole finance team. Thank you for doing all this work. It's we did spend a lot of time discussing it at Finance Committee, but now at Council, it's a relatively easy piece of work to discuss and vote on. So with that, I will move council be adjourned. Those in favor,